This video shows the construction of the ii7b-V-I cadence as used by Bach in the chorales. Most of the cadences in the chorales require a perfect cadence, and ii7b-V-I is the most frequently used pattern. In this extract in B-flat major from Riemann-Schneider 260, the second phrase is a typical example, already identified as a ii7b-V-I cadence. Whenever a phrase ends 2 to 1 in the melody, supertonic to tonic, like this, ii7b-V-I should be your first choice. Let us hear how this sounds. Here's an example in G major which we'll use for demonstration purposes. It could represent a typical phrase from a chorale in a major key. The phrase ends on the tonic on the first beat of the final bar, with a pause note as a semibreve. This is preceded by the supertonic as a minim. It is important that when minims precede the pause note, that they are given two separate crotchet beat chords. A step-by-step demonstration of how to build this cadence will now follow. It would be advantageous to write out the stimulus on manuscript paper and copy each step as and when it occurs. Use the pause button on the video to enable you to keep up. The first thing to do is look at what you need to supply. In this example, 4 chords are needed. The 3 cadence chords, which will be ii7b, 5 and 1, and the chord preceding the cadence chords. Next, establish the key, G major. Now number the notes of the melody using Arabic numerals above the soprano part. This may seem a little unnecessary at the moment, but it is useful to build good working practice that will help you when you harmonise whole chorale melodies later. Numbering the melody with Arabic numerals helps you to identify moments where set-piece chord progressions can be used, since these are frequently linked to degrees of the scale. Next, identify the chords that will be used by writing in Roman numerals underneath the bass stave. It is helpful to include the label for the last chord given, since you're trying to provide continuity in your answer. In this case, the last chord given is 5-7. Since 5-7 is an unstable chord, it has to be followed by chord 1. Then we have the approach chord underneath the supertonic minim, ii7b, followed by 5 in root position. The pause chord is harmonised with chord 1 in root position. It is important with perfect cadence patterns in the chorales to use root position chords for the last 2 cadence chords, 5 and 1. The approach chord may be an inversion, as it is here with ii7b. Now the bass line is added, following the Roman numerals. In this case it will be G, C, D, and back to G, with a pause underneath. Having added the bass notes, it is now very important to check the soprano against the bass for consecutive octaves or consecutive fifths. If any are found, they need to be corrected before moving on. In this case, the bass moves mainly in contrary motion to the soprano, and it is free of consecutives. Don't forget to check for consecutives between the last given chord and the first chord that you supply at every stage. The alto and tenor parts will now be added to chord 1 on the second beat of bar 1, trying to move by the smallest possible interval within each part from chord to chord, and then check for consecutives. There are two issues to consider here. Firstly, this cadence includes a dissonant chord, 2/7b. Any chord that includes a seventh includes a dissonance, and this must be carefully and strictly handled. All dissonance in chorale style needs to be prepared, sounded, and resolved in the same vocal part. These three stages of preparation, sounding, and resolution will take place, in this case, over 3 crotchet beats. Here is an example away from the chorales. There is obviously a dissonance over chord 5, the G clashing with the A. Preparation of the dissonance means sounding the note of dissonance, in this case the G, as a consonance in the previous chord, in this case chord 1. Once sounded as a clash, in this case against chord 5, the dissonance is resolved downwards onto a consonant harmony note, in this case to F sharp, also part of chord 5. Note that this resolution rarely takes place in an upwards direction. It is, for the purposes of this exam, always downwards. In this key, the note of dissonance in 2/7b is G, the consonant notes being A, C and E. G is also the tonic of the home key, and so we must decide whether it should be placed in the alto or tenor part in the chorale cadence. If it is possible to exercise a choice, manage the dissonance in the alto part. It will be far more effective between the two highest parts that are also close together, the soprano and alto, than between the soprano and tenor. The second issue, therefore, is which part should contain all 3 stages of the dissonance. Where to place the note of preparation may well be governed by the voicing of the last given chord, in this case 5/7. Here the tenor part contains 2 quavers descending from top F sharp to E. The second of these, the E, is clearly a passing note, suggesting that the next note of the tenor, in chord 1 on the second beat, will be a D. Following these clues means that the sensible choice for the alto will therefore be a G. This is the note of preparation for the dissonance which is about to follow. Normal practice at this point is to continue adding the alto and tenor together, checking for consecutives as you go from chord to chord. However, 2/7b-5-1 is such a strong formula that parts will have an inevitable direction to them. Since the process of managing the dissonance has been started in the alto, it would make sense to complete the alto part for the rest of the cadence. The dissonance is sounded above 2/7b. It is then resolved downwards to F sharp, being the third of chord 5. It must not resolve upwards. F sharp is also the leading note. Normal practice would be to follow the leading note with a tonic. This would leave the final chord, chord 1, incomplete, and so Bach chooses to drop the leading note to the 5th of the tonic chord, a gap or leap of a major third. It is very important that you do not close this gap with a passing note or any other form of melodic decoration. This gap is a signature of Bach's that is essential for reproducing his style. The tenor part is now added with a view to completing the chords and moving from note to note as smoothly as possible. The missing note from 2/7b is an E, which the tenor supplies. Chord 5 is already complete, and so it doubles the root D. Chord 1, the pause chord, is missing an essential note, B, the third of the chord, now supplied by the tenor. At the moment, the tenor also leaps between its penultimate and final notes. Bach does choose to fill this gap with a passing note, a non-harmony or note that is not part of the chord, but, by moving by step, joins together or passes between chord tones. The D is turned into a quaver, and a C natural is added, passing between the D and the B. This passing note, here a C natural, also happens to be the seventh of chord 5. The effect is known as the passing seventh and demonstrates the melodic origins of the dominant seventh chord. It is approached by step and left by step in a downwards direction. The fall of a semitone from C to B has an inevitable feel to it. The cadence is now complete and should be checked for consecutives. It should be reproduced exactly as found here and transposed into all keys. It can be used whenever the melody falls from 2 to 1 or from supertonic to tonic at the end of a phrase. Let's hear how it sounds. In a minor key, you follow exactly the same steps, but you have to take extra care to supply the appropriate accidentals. The example here is in E minor, the relative minor of G major. We're joining the harmonization at a later stage. The Arabic and Roman numerals have already been added, along with the bass notes. Note the use of lowercase numerals signifying minor chords. The bass line has also been checked for consecutives against the soprano part. The alto and tenor parts are added to chord 1 on the second beat of bar 1. The same issues apply as in the G major example. The presence of a C-sharp quaver in chord 5-7 in the tenor part suggests that it is passing down to a B. This will mean that the alto will move from F-sharp on chord 5-7 to E in chord 1. Don't be alarmed by the C-sharp as opposed to a C natural in the tenor part. This is just the melodic form of the minor scale. It's essential to use this in order to create conjunct motion between notes. If it were a C natural, there would actually be a gap of a minor third between the D sharp and C natural quavers, which would sound really odd. So going on to complete the alto part, the dissonance is sounded over 2/7b as an E. It's then resolved by dropping a semitone to the leading note, the third of chord 5, making sure of course that the accidental is clearly written. Then it will drop to the fifth of the tonic chord, as before. The tenor is now added. The missing note from 2/7b in this case is a C natural, and so it's necessary to cancel the accidental created by the C sharp just a couple of beats earlier. The root is doubled in chord 5. The tenor then drops to supply the essential missing note from chord 1 on the pulse chord, a G. The passing seventh is created, and the cadence is complete once it is checked for consecutives. Let's hear how this sounds. If this was the very last cadence as part of a minor key chorale, a tierce Picardy or Picardy third would have to be added to the final chord, turning it from minor to major. A tierce Picardy is optional elsewhere in the chorale, but an essential part of the style on the last chord and cannot be left out. Let's hear how the cadence sounds now with a tierce Picardy.